Oh, Valerie, we're the only two that's on.
It's now 7:30, but we're going to wait for a quorum of the Board of Education to begin the meeting. This is the Board of Education meeting. We are waiting for a quorum of the board to begin the public session. Again, I just want to say thank you for your patience. We continue to wait for a quorum of trustees to begin the Board of Education meeting.
Looks like we have a quorum.
Great. Thank you, Valerie. Welcome to the Board of Education meeting, Wednesday, October 14th, 2020. I want to welcome Melissa De La Barrera as the new district clerk to the meeting. And also welcome to board trustees and to Valerie and Maureen. I know that Melissa Szymanski may be able to join us later on in the session. And thank you to the participants and the public that are here to view our meeting. This evening, we anticipate having a presentation from PKF O'Connor Davies, which is our auditor, Susan Barassi. And as in particular, as we have this outside presenter, we're asking that the first public comment period be exclusive to items that are on our agenda. And if you would like to participate with a public comment on anything outside of what is on our agenda, that you do so at the second public comment later in the meeting. So if you would like to make a public comment on any items on the agenda itself, please, you could raise your hand feature in the sidebar. And during the first public comment, if it is about our agenda items, you'll have an opportunity to participate then, and any other open public comment will be done at the second public comment portion of the meeting. And with that, Dr. Henning-Piedmont, do you have any announcements?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Lauren, and good evening, Board of Education trustees. You are probably aware that the Hastings-on-Hudson village formed, as per the governor's order to all police departments in the state of New York, a police reform and reinvention collaborative committee, which I am participating on, was invited to participate on. And the first meeting actually was this evening. It started at 6 and I had to leave because we had an executive session. So I do know that the agenda for this evening was to follow the sort of plan to develop a code of conduct, to plan its first public meetings, to talk about various topics. When I left the meeting, Chief Dosen was actually giving the committee a bit of a review. And in case you are not aware of the governor's order and sort of what the committees are tasked to do is the stakeholders in the community. So a number of people are in the community are participating with lots of different stakeholder backgrounds to develop a plan which shall consider evidence-based policing strategies, including but not limited to use of force policies, procedural justice, any studies addressing systemic racial bias or racial justice in policing, implicit bias and awareness training, de-escalation training and practices, law enforcement assisted diversion programs, restorative justice practices, community-based outreach and conflict resolution, problem-oriented policing, hotspots of policing, focused deterrence, crime prevention through environmental design, violence prevention and reduction interventions, and to model various policies across various standards of law enforcement. So I thought that was worthwhile to hear kind of what the committee is tasked with over time. And as I said, this is an effort that all of the police departments are engaged in. So as I said, I'm very happy to have been invited to participate. You probably are also aware of the newly formed group this summer formed by two Hastings parents. It's called Parenting Children of Color. The co-founders and directors are Dr. Demarius Lois Yamaha Lang and Ms. Christina Catalan. They are probably going to introduce themselves to the Board of Education at our October 26th or November 9th board meeting. I'm involved, I'm serving on one of their committees, as is Tesfa Stewart, and the committee emerged out of the the social unrest that occurred over the summer, and so a number of their own children were involved, and it was an opportunity for them to fill a vacuum to really focus on, working with the school system, working with the community to ensure that, issues of social justice and equality are parts of the ways in which they see their efforts, moving forward and working collaboratively with everyone. So I look forward to their presentation to the board on one of those dates, and I'll get back to you on that. This month launches the National Principals Month, but it also signals tomorrow the end of the National Hispanic Heritage Month, which I'm sure many of you were involved in, and it's in recognition of the contributions and the influence of Hispanic Americans to history, culture, and achievement in the U.S. So I hope that there were lots of events and activities and lessons that integrated the importance of that history. It shouldn't be relegated to a month. None of it should be, but it certainly is an opportunity to highlight those achievements and efforts, and to celebrate inclusiveness too. So that's really great. A number of chats have been organized for the coming months. So I'm continuing the PTSA and SEPTA Superintendent's Chat Collaborative. So that's scheduled on a Wednesday once per month. The PTSA and SEPTA organize that, and they solicit questions from the community in advance. And obviously that's moderated by them, and all of the administrators are present to make sure that we're available to respond and answer to any questions that the community may have about any aspect of schooling or any issue that emerges. It's a great opportunity for the community to actually hear firsthand from administrators, especially if they're hearing, something that, potentially is, may have some different sort of layers to it. It's a good place to get answers to your questions. We're also, being TESPA, Jeanette Coker and myself, continuing the students' time to talk about racism chat, which is once a month. There's a regular superintendent's chat that Melissa and I convene, which again is just a conversation to talk, to me or share any thoughts or suggestions or concerns. And then we have our faculty and staff conversation about becoming an anti-racist chat, which again is open to all of our faculty and staff. It's an opportunity for us to, take the, the sort of the lead of moving forth and advancing some of the work that started, and some of the work that obviously has been underway in our diversity committee, which I think is doing some really amazing work to serve as a platform, as a resource for our schools and our educators. So that work continues, and I know that that's probably a board member that's going to share a little bit of information about the most recent meeting. So that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. Maureen, did you have any comments this evening?
Yes, I'll just make one comment, because the rest we'll be talking about the audit report later tonight, and I'll also present there as well. I just wanted to let everyone know that this week we're working with Hillside to get a note out to parents. We've received our other deployment of our Chromebooks, and we'll be working to get those out to our 3rd and 4th grade students as we continue with our deployment to ensure that students have a one-to-one Chromebook, so that can assist them when they're either at home or bringing them into school. And this way, we're assured that everyone has technology, so that they're, no matter what model we're in, they're properly supported. We're also going to be rolling out new devices to teachers. As we know, when we went into this model, just the amount of Chromebooks we had available, some of the Chromebooks teachers had were some of the older devices we had. So we'll start to be replacing those also this week. And I just, again, want to acknowledge and thank our technology team that has done an amazing job this year, and really just keeping up on not only the daily help desk tickets, but the larger deployments, as well as upgrades to the system as needed. So just want to thank them again. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. And yes, Melissa Szymanski did have a conflict this evening and may be able to join us later on in the session. But if you look at this week's Hastings Daily, there was a newsletter from her Office of Curriculum and Instruction, which provides a large update of what's going on throughout the district. So that's another resource to hear an update from her.
And could I just mention, Lauren, that she also is administering or in the process of administering a number of surveys about Flex Wednesday. Obviously, on October 20th, the board has a work session where administrators will be, sharing some, feedback with regards to the current programming model and, providing some recommendations that they have about, those components of the current hybrid model that are that have been successful and some of the opportunities for improvement. And certainly Flex Wednesday is at, sort of at the heart of that discussion as a new sort of component of the remote learning program for us this year. And we're gathering feedback from students, from families, as well as from our educators. So Melissa will be sharing that information on October 20th. Thank you.
Melissa, if you could please make both the student representatives, Sophia Monero and Sabine Hinkate, moderators into the session. That way we can receive their student report. Thank you. And Sabine and Sophia, welcome, and you are welcome to share once you're connected.
Hi, you guys can hear me, right? Okay, so unfortunately, Sophia couldn't make it tonight. She had a migraine or something like that, so it's just me for today. Tonight's report is more just an update about general goings on around the school. The virtual club fair is on Friday, which consists of a slideshow that will be sent out to all students. And as of right now, I think there are 14 clubs that are represented. The environmental club is having a beach cleanup on Saturday. The student union has also been working to plan upcoming spirit weeks, as well as future fundraising ideas. Many people that are involved in sports are glad to have that element of student life back. The academic challenge team is having their first virtual tournament next week. And finally, I just wanted to say that the general consensus surrounding the hybrid model in general is that there's a clear, genuine effort from staff and administration, everyone that's involved, to try and make school the best experience possible. So that's a really good thing. But yeah, that's it. There's not much else to update on.
Thank you, Sabine. That's actually a lot, and it's great to hear that the clubs and activities are moving forward, and that students are getting back into the rhythms of more typical school days. So thank you, and send our best to Sophia.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sabine.
We do have our first public comment, and as I mentioned at the opening of the meeting, if there are commenters who would like to comment on any aspect of the agenda we have this evening, this is the opportunity to speak on those items. If there are other open comments that participants have, please hold those for the second comment period. And if there is someone now that would like to speak on items in our agenda, you can use the raise your hand feature in the sidebar, and Melissa will make you available to speak for 3 minutes, and you should mention your name and if you're a resident of Hastings.
Hi, I just unmuted Gabrielle Lesser.
Hello, Ms. Lesser. Do you have comments about the agenda items this evening?
I'm not sure. I couldn't actually find the agenda. Sorry. But I have comments about the construction project. So you tell me if you want me to do it now or later.
It would be best to hold all comments unless they're on the agenda to the second public comment period, and I appreciate your understanding.
Okay, thank you.
I just unmuted another user. It just says Zoom user.
Hello, do you have comment about items on the Board of Education agenda? Thank you, Melissa. It doesn't appear that person is making a comment.
Okay. We just had those two.
Thank you, Melissa. So we're going to move on to the presentation that we have this evening, which is prepared by Susan Barassi from PKF O'Connor Davies. It is regarding the financial year ending, beginning July 1st, 2019 and ending June 30th, 2020. And there will be a supplementary presentation done by Maureen Caraballo following. The summary of which of the report by PKF O'Connor Davies is that there was determination that they did not identify any deficiencies in internal control that considered to be material weaknesses, but they do have recommendations which are outlined and summarized in the report in the business item, which is number 10 in our agenda, and which will be presented as part of Susan's presentation tonight. So thank you, Susan and Maureen, and you can go right ahead at this point.
So yes,
Welcome.
so I'm here. Susan's actually, joined me tonight just to make sure that there was no issue with delivering her report to the board. So Susan will go through the slides she presented, and as you had mentioned, Lauren, all the materials, including the full audit report, the recommendation, the letters to governance, the response to that, and all the audit documents are attached to the agenda for, if anyone wanted to review them there. So Susan, I'm going to turn my computer, and she's on the other side of my office, and she will be presenting. And Melissa, if you can key up the presentation, please. And for Susan, it's the first item under presentation 10/9/2020 is Susan's presentation.
Just do it landscape, right?
But, yeah.
But you could twist it, otherwise that's okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you.
yeah,
Perfect.
Very good.
There we go. And I will.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Susan Barossi. I'm a partner with PKF O'Connor Davies, and I was here in August during the power outage. It seems like it, and we were working on the audit for the school district. I was here with 4 other people, 4 other auditors, consisting of a manager, and 2 senior staff, and a staff level accountant. So time has flown by, but I see, when we went into this process, the consideration was, were we going to do this audit totally remote, but the school district was able to provide the proper social distancing, and we were able to conduct the audit on site. Obviously, we've been going back and forth and working remotely very successfully, but that's because you have a great board and a very strong financial team. So this is a summary presentation of the audit process. As I said, we were here in August, and really the audit has been ongoing since August, okay? Because this is a summary of approximately 100-page document, which are your financial statements. So let's touch upon this, and then what has been the process is that I've asked Maureen to chime in during this presentation, but after my presentation, Maureen has a summary presentation as well to go over more detail of what I'm presenting. So let's go to the first slide, page 1. And PKF O'Connor Davies performed the audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards to ensure that the audit was designed to achieve reasonable rather than absolute assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement. So ongoing throughout the year, monthly, internally, the finance department prepares financials, okay? They're not in the same format, the 100 pages that we produce at the end, but it's a trial balance and financial numbers which are reconciled and have all the supporting documentation. We here at O'Connor Davies as auditors, what do they mean by not absolute assurance? We don't look at every single transaction, But what we do is plan our audit, which we did our planning in February,
Oh,
basically
February,
February prior to the fiscal year end, to discuss with the audit committee, which the audit committee, as part of the 5-point plan for New York State, the school district is required to have, number one, an external audit by external auditors, an internal audit by internal auditors, and that is more of a process audit, and a claims auditor that looks at all the claims, and required to have a finance/audit committee, which plans the audit and then goes over, when the audit is finished, goes over the draft financial statements, which we did last week, and then also the school district is required to have a public presentation. So meaning absolute assurance, we didn't look at every single transaction. We looked at the financials, read all the minutes, read all the internal control documents, planned our materiality, and performed our test work to have reasonable assurance rather than absolute assurance. Now, you must remember that the school district is made up of many funds, one of them being the general fund, which is the operational fund, which I would think you would compare that to your home budget, right? So it was your operational budget. But then there were other funds, which were capital projects fund, where the capital projects run through. And then there are funds which are called non-major funds. Not because they're less important than the others, but there are other funds like the school lunch fund, where the cafeterias run through, the special purpose fund, and the debt service fund. Okay, but tonight I'm going to focus on the general fund. And as was said by Lauren, that we're going to communicate in writing, we communicate in writing any deficiencies in internal control were basically housekeeping items. We advise management of the appropriateness of their accounting policies, which were reasonable for the district. And we are required to communicate any fraud or illegal acts, which we did not encounter any instances of suspicion or allegations of fraud noted. And if we did, we would go directly either to the finance team. If we felt it was with the finance team, we would go directly to the superintendent. If we felt it was with the superintendent, finance team, would go directly to the board. Let's go to next slide.
Oh, next slide, Melissa.
Right.
Thank you.
This is a summary of basically what was the end result of the audit. So what is the purpose of having an external audit? Well, yes, you'd get that 100-page document, which shows the balance sheet and the revenues and expenditures and changes in fund balance for all the funds. But basically, there's one piece of paper included in that 100 pages that's owned by PCAF O'Connor-Davies, and that's called the auditor's report. And the most favorable opinion an auditor's report can have is in what we called an unmodified opinion on the financial statements, which the district did receive at the end of the process. As I said, we reviewed the internal controls within the context of our audit, not to give an opinion on internal controls, but just to give our a summary of our findings. And if there were material weaknesses, we would have to report those, and there were no material weaknesses noted. As we remember, our audit was being planned in February and March, and then what happened? COVID happened, okay? So we have to put in that, you know what? We have to see at the end of the year, your end results. You arrived at fund balances, which we will go over. Fund balances more to a commercial organization would be retained earnings, would be your net equity. So, actual results could differ from those estimates, particularly given the significant social and economic disruptions and uncertainties associated with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and the mitigation responses, and such differences may be material. This is not to alarm you, but what this is to touch upon, that included in the financial statements are some receivables for state aid, okay, for federal aid. And what the district did was that we, as external auditors, reviewed very closely with the finance team and with the board, with the superintendent, the reasonableness of collectability of certain receivables from the state, and certain deferrals of certain revenues where we felt might not be collected within what they call the school district's revenue recognition policy. What we did is we deferred some of those revenues, okay? So just making sure that you're aware that accounting estimates are sensitive because of their significance to the financial statements and their susceptibility to change, and these were thoroughly discussed. But management believed that the estimates used and the assumptions made are adequate and based on the information currently available, and we evaluated the key factors and assumptions used to develop the estimates and determining that they are reasonable in relation to the financial statements. All audit adjustments were discussed with management. Most of those adjustments, since we come in so close to the year end, remember the fiscal year end ends June 30th, and we are here in the second week of August. So most of the adjustments were first week of August. First of those adjustments, right? Maureen said first week of August. Those adjustments are what so the trial balances are handed over remotely to us basically in July, and then we come in and do the audit. They give us any adjustments they found, and those are all described and clearly labeled as client adjustments in another document that is available. There were no difficulties encountered during our audit, no unresolved matters, no disagreements with management. No, the only consultation by us with other auditors would be with the internal auditor, where we reviewed the risk assessment, and now I know they're awaiting from the internal auditor their focus area. Our independence was not impaired. What I have to say that's a very positive about Hastings School District is that there is an ongoing communication with PKF O'Connor Davies throughout the year. In fact, I'm sure that the finance team here is pretty tired of PKF O'Connor Davies because there really truly is an ongoing communication with Maureen and her team. So now we're going to go to the next slide. And these are the financial statement highlights. And as I said, we are going to focus on the general funds revenue, expenditures, and summary year end June 30, 2020. Now, there's an original budget column. There's a final budget column. So the original budget is voted upon, right? And then there's a final budget, which includes any resolutions that are made to that original budget during the year. And those resolutions have to be approved by the board. And what we do is we test as an external audit firm, not every single modification, but we randomly test certain modifications and go from original to final and from final to original. But what we're going to focus on right now is the actual, what actually happened for the school district. And then the next slide presentation, which will be done by Maureen, she'll be talking about the variances. So at what happened, there was $49.6 million of revenues. There was a variance from the original and final budget of $710,000, which Maureen will go into later. Total expenditures were $146,960, plus encumbrances. What do those encumbrances mean? Those are purchase orders issued and outstanding, which invoices had not been received. That's basically a governmental term. So therefore, when you take the final budget less the actual and the encumbrances, there was a $2.5 million positive variance, which Maureen will go into. When you take the revenues less the expenditures, you have a $1.4 million positive. You add transfers in, which are transfers in from other funds, and then transfers out to other funds.
I just want to say that we'll get into what those are is the way they have to account for debt payments. And it's just an accounting place where people are typically accustomed to seeing those in the budget. So when we talk about transfers in and transfers out, we can, it's really part of our base budget, but it's the way it needs to be accounted for in this, in the accounting here on the fund balance level. So.
Exactly.
I don't want people to think we were transferring in, large sums from other accounts. Right. It's a accounting term for fund accounting.
And there are planned transfers in and planned transfers out from all the other funds to and from the operational fund, right? Then there is, so what happened? There was a net change in fund balance, an increase in fund balance of $130,338. Added to the $9 million, $19,000 beginning fund balance, we arrived at an ending fund balance of $9.1 million at the end of the year, okay? They have to realize that was a very positive place to be, especially since COVID happened in beginning of March, okay? And a lot was going on with the school district. Let's go to the next page. So that $9 million fund balance, that's not all free and clear. And what that fund balance represents, if you look at the general fund column, the $9,149,000 at the bottom, those are basically, the best way to describe that are buckets. And those buckets are filled with certain monies, which when you add all those buckets together, accumulate to the 9.1 million. But those buckets have certain restrictions on them. And those restrictions are allowed restrictions. And those are restrictions which are used to, restrictions where the monies will be released for future. And what's so very important, especially now during COVID times, is that you have those buckets. There are so many districts, right? Especially upstate, which don't have those buckets. So let's look at the general fund bucket. We have.
I have that. I also have it.
Oh, you have that, so we'll go
Yeah,
through that later. 5 million in restricted. We have assigned 401,000. We have an end amount you plan to be used in your subsequent year's budget, which now what you are now experiencing the subsequent year of 1.6 million. And then you have an unassigned. An unassigned fund balance is 1.9 million, and unassigned is the amount that's after all the buckets and what is available. And that will be discussed later as well. Then you have your other funds, which are capital projects fund, and your non-major funds, which are detailed in the financial statements. Let's go to the next slide.
Okay.
So what we're going to do is now go to Maureen's slide.
Yeah, if Melissa, if you could bring up my slide deck, and I'm going to just kind of break down a little bit of what Susan shared tonight in terms of what, what do these numbers really represent, and just kind of just give us a little bit more detail on that. So you can go to the first slide, Melissa, please. Okay, so what I want to share this evening is just some highlights I want to speak to in terms of, looking at last year's financials first and just kind of focusing there. So in 1920, and that was the financial statement that that was just presented, we did experience during our closure, COVID-related savings, meaning because the school was closed, there were certain expenditures that we didn't have to deal with last year, and that accounted for about $850,000 of the savings. And again, as we get further into looking at the the overall expenditure savings, we'll see how that broke down. But again, just to kind of remind people of, we spoke about a lot of this at last year's budget, but because of the closure, there were many things, and we'll get into greater detail about what those things were. Also, in 1920, prior to COVID, the first 3 quarters in the sales tax in Westchester County last year, because there was an increase in the rate last year of 1%, the first 3 quarters of last year, we were trending at a much higher revenue. And the reason I bring this up is as we speak about after finalizing this year's discussion, just looking at what does that mean for upcoming years. So, that increase in some of those revenues, we were trending on the higher end last year, and that was related to the increase at the Westchester County level. Again, this is also part of looking at our financials. There was some additional grant allocation that we had in 1920 that we do not have this year. So last year, because we had some rollover funds from the previous 18-19 school year, we actually did have more federal funding that was flowing into our budget in the 1920 school year that is now not going to be the same in the 2021. So, we'll just see how those things factored into our financials. We also last year too, again, this was unique to last year, and the reason I highlight this is, when you have a reduction sometimes in some what we call out of district placements, we'll see how the impact that had on our expenditures at the 1920 year. And again, these are very subject to change year over year. And you could experience one thing one year, but they can have a significant impact on expenditures. And then again, we just had some reduction in the amount of staffing. And again, we're speaking about 1920 based on some needs that, again, in the following year could look very different. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is really, Susan, actually, this was a number from an earlier slide, and this really just summarizes as Susan said, we started with an original expenditure plan last year, and we ended up with spending $2.5 million less than was initially planned. Now, again, that, as many know or on the board, that, you know, typically, again, running an operations of $52 million budget, you will always have some monies left. I mean, you hope to have some monies left in some years, because there are some contingencies when you're creating a budget, you know, a spending plan, typically 18 months in advance of when that expenditure plan is going to be finalized. So last year, just to kind of give it at a high level, where were those what was the things that were really driving the expenditure savings? And as I mentioned, you know, we did have about an 850,000 plus of that $2.5 million was related to COVID savings. It does break down over a number of areas, and I'll kind of go through those. The first line item here is not COVID-related savings, but rather, as I referred to on an earlier page, if you have some changes, some of your out-of-district placements, or, you know, some changes in some services, this $560,000 savings in special education services is related to that. And it is a combination sometimes of placements change, or either students being in or out of district, or either leaving district. And because of the, in some cases, the cost of educating different students, this could represent a switch of 3 or 4 students, just to put it into some kind of a context for just understanding, you know, the numbers related to that savings we saw. The bus service, this was primarily, if not all, driven by COVID closures. We closed in March, as in all of our in-district busing, as well as our out-of-district busing, which is a large portion of what we spend. You know, that we had March, April, May, and June of not transporting students, and we did see a significant amount of last year expenditure savings based on that reduction in busing. Again, co-curricular and athletics, this was directly tied again to the COVID closure, because in the spring season and the spring co-curriculars, as well as the athletics, it's a large portion of our spending in those areas. And again, with the closure, we didn't run those activities, and we have this savings here. Substitute savings, again, we were closed large, you know, good portion of our school year. And because of that, of course, we didn't have a need for daily subs. And again, that, or for either teacher aides or teachers or any of our staff that requires a substitute. So the savings reflected here would have been, had we not closed with COVID, that would have been money we would have spent. Utility savings, again, mostly driven by COVID. You don't have a building that's occupied or with very few people. And again, you know, buildings of this size and not running electricity and air conditionings and things as we normally do through the May and June in particular, we did see a significant savings in our utility bills during that time. Salary and benefit savings. Again, there's always, you know, there's always changes in our staffing, and sometimes either we have plans for some staff that doesn't materialize. It also is a combination of projecting replacements for retirees and the changeability there. So we do, this was mostly just driven by either changes in either staffing needs and or people either who retired and their placements being much less expensive. And just to kind of give you a sense of a replacement of a retiree, just as an example, on one individual person who retires, you can see a swing of about $75,000 depending on the benefit need of that replacement. So again, there are always, you know, in most years, districts have a little bit of flexibility in some of these lines, but again, this is just kind of an overall savings, and also much of this is also like money we would have either spent in professional development and other kind of light items. So when I say salary, it's anything other than the substitutes that I kind of put separately. It was like overtime for custodians and things that were not needed. So it's like a lot of expenditure savings when the school was closed overall. And again, and then the rest of it was really made up of reduction in supplies and contractual expenses of all varying things. Some that we would have obviously, we experienced, you know, most years, not every dime is spent in every area. And then of course, with the closure for a good chunk of our school year, there were quite a few, you know, things that we didn't end up spending money on. So that's where we arrive at the $2.5 million. And I'll just kind of give you now on the revenue side of things, if you can advance, Melissa, please. So in terms of our revenue highlights, and again, we're just speaking about either the positive variance over what was originally factored in. The first, the largest item there where we saw a positive revenue variance was tuition other districts. And this is an item that we speak about during the development of our budget and at times like this when we closing out the end of the school year. This line item is when other districts place their students in our district for to attend a special education program, and they are particularly in the programs we have here, they are fairly expensive placements, and this could represent this positive, just to give you a sense of, that could be 2 or 3 students that were unanticipated that can produce a variance of this amount. And because this is a very, we have to always plan very conservatively when we budget this line item, because it's really dependent upon another school district's, whether even the student attended the year before, it has to be in agreement with their local school district and the parents, and our ability to accept that student based on our own enrollment. So when we do plan for this, we always have monies budgeted for this, but it's a lot of times we don't even have the commitment for the student to come until well after the budget. So, what you'll notice on a year-to-year basis, if we experience this again in the future, that this is not an unusual area in which to see a positive variance, because of the fact we have to be very conservative when we budget this. And because if we budget for it, we don't receive the revenues, we're gonna have a big issue on our hands. Sales tax, I had mentioned the first 3 quarters of last year were great. The 1% increase in the county sales tax, and also I guess the actual overall revenues were much higher last year. In the last quarter, we saw a large drop in that amount. So last year we did have a $210,000 positive variance. And just to also give you the timing, when we were developing our budget, that decision was made like when we already had sort of locked in our budget for that year. So the good news is we did have a positive variance. And we did increase our sales tax line a bit this year in this year's budget, but I think we just have to be very careful. I think everyone appreciates that, there wasn't a lot of sales tax by, not the typical buying in the last quarter, the first quarter this year either. Interest income, we did last year see a positive variance here. As all of you know, the interest income is close to 0 now on any account. So I think even what we have projected for this year will be happy and lucky if we collect that. So we may actually see a different, this going in an opposite direction for this upcoming year. State aid, again, if you can imagine you're budgeting revenues, there's always going to be some variance that, there'll never be a year in which that it'll either be 100% on point. And part of that is because some of state aid, as we've discussed in the past, is driven on expenditure-driven aid. So we obviously have foundation aid and some aids that are driven purely on other factors, attendance and things such as that. But we do have expenditure-driven state aid. And, we are given an estimate when we develop our budget, this actually being $38,000 over. We were very close to that estimate. And we deferred a bit, as Susan had mentioned, because of the BOCES, the last BOCES payment that there was some concern the state had talked about reducing that. So had that not happened, that number would have been a little bit higher. But again, much of those state aids are driven by what you're spending the year before. So we did see a positive variance there. As Susan had mentioned, when we talked about deferring some of the aids, that would have been slightly higher had we not deferred some of our BOCES receivable based upon, and we accrued it this year based upon the we didn't actually get it yet, so that's why we had to defer it. And then that's made up of times when people are using our building. It could be, sometimes it's things that if we get reimbursements of some sort. So, that was this E-rate, so the other is this made up of a bunch of sub revenue categories, and there was a positive variance. If you add all those up together, 17,000. And that brings us to where we had a positive variance of 710,000. Next, please. And just, you know, what you do is on both, I mean, when we budget, I mean, in typical years, I not talking about necessarily the development of the 2021 budget, but people budget conservatively on revenues and expenditures, because if you don't make your revenue projections, you're going to have to make cuts during the school year. So it is always best, and we'll talk about, as we talk about fund balance, I mean, all schools have them. This is the way fund balance occurs, is when you have these positive variances. That's where that money comes from. So again, I just wanted to remind everyone, and this was discussed and at length during our budget process last year, and when the board was looking at both some of the expenditure savings we would have had normally, as well as the expenditure savings related to COVID. And there was a lot of discussion at the time of developing the 2021 budget about how to use that money. And I think what we, you know, discussed at that time was, although we had the savings from COVID, in particular, just looking at those expenditure savings, that was a one-time savings. And had we used that money to either, you know, bring it in to fund something in the 2021 budget, you know, we would have been kind of, you know, making a larger hole for ourselves. And also in thinking about that was one factor that, you know, we thought about. But the other piece that was considered was knowing that going, you know, although last year we had some expenditure savings, just already being, you know, warned by the state of the significant financial trouble they were in, and just understanding that, you know, due to the pandemic, the following budget year, we would be seeing increases in costs, and ensuring that we are able to make ourselves financially stable, you know, beyond the our normal allocation of fund balance, which we would have done normally. We really took the opportunity, the savings that we did experience last year, and we used that to help put money in, and I'll speak about how we allocated that money. And, you know, the reasoning would be, of course, to ensure that as we go into some difficult financial budgets, that we wanted to ensure that we had monies in these reserves to help us offset that during a time in which it would be difficult to do that. So going in with having these fund balances was extremely important in thinking about our multi-year planning, as we always do. We can't look at things in 1 year, so we always have to look at it over the course of the few years, especially in light of what we're experiencing. So based upon, we've looked at, we just showed the $2.5 million positive variance on expenditures and the 700,000 positive variance on revenues. How did that money, you know, how was that money, what happened with those funds? So the first item on here is we used $1.6 million, $1,680,000 was used out of that money we just discussed to balance the 2021 budget. So right off the top, we use a significant portion of that money, and that money was brought in as a revenue. And if had that money not been available, we would have had a $1.6 million deficit in development of the 2021 budget. So we did use quite a bit of the savings that we experienced last year, and we used that to offset the 2021 budget. The next allocation we made was to put $700,000 into our employee retirement reserve. Now, this is a reserve that we do put money in, but we also used $500,000 of that money to address liabilities for this year. And it was extremely important to put monies into this account, both that and the next one, the teacher's retirement reserve, due to the fact that when the when the market's dropping as it is now, there is a direct effect on the amount the school district is required to pay to both of these retirement funds, as they are fully vested and they're on full accrual basis. So already, just as an example, the estimated bill for next year is in the ERS is already going up like $150,000 over what it was this year. So, you know, having money here, we're reserving at, we're below our legal ability to reserve, meaning each of these reserves, it's not as though we can just put like any you know, amount of money we want to put in them. They are you're only allowed to reserve up until 3 times what your liability would be. So there are restrictions on them just in terms of, our ability, and each of them has a legal requirement that we have to meet in order to reserve money for them. So that was extremely important to put money for both the employee retirement reserve and the teacher retirement reserve. It helps us when the rates fluctuate up and down to be able to use those monies to help level off the budgeting amounts for those. We also did allocate $50,000 to our unemployment reserve. This was a new reserve we established, and again, very timely due to the fact that many, with some people, we had anticipated planned reductions in force last year. As a school district, unlike business, we actually have to pay whatever people get paid. We're billed for it, and we have to repay Department of Labor fully for those expenses. So we're not paying a percentage of payroll taxes. We are actually paying the liability. Just to give you a sense of where we are thus far this year, we've already up until I think it only really covers us through the end of September. We're about 35,000 we've already paid out. So just to give you a sense of how quickly those that fund can be used up. Allocated 250,000 to establish a liability reserve to address legal settlement liabilities. This was something that we felt was very important to establish, and also to fund. As the board is aware, we do face liabilities from time to time. Again, this liability reserve had to be set up, and you actually have to have a liability to set it up in order, or potential of liability rather. Again, this is a way to ensure that as we know of things that may be on the horizon, that we're properly funding and reserving for those obligations, so that if money is available, of course, we do that, and I think that's the right thing to do to ensure financial stability in the district. We also allocated $500,000 to the tax certiorari reserve, and we've spoken about this. It's we've had this reserve in the district for many years. Just to give you a sense of it, probably in the last maybe 5 to 7 years, we've paid out well over $1 million in claims that were made against the district. We still have a very high open liability in this reserve, although I think that's not to scare anybody. I think we've always analyzed what our liabilities are and try to fund it and ensure that we can, address the short term, the next 5 years at the very least, so we don't have to borrow. Because if you do not have a reserve for these, and you're served, as we are every year, with we have to make a reimbursement to a person who's filed against us. If you don't have a reserve, you actually have to borrow, and it's good that we were able to put this monies in, and I think that'll position us very well for the next few years to address any liabilities that come our way. Next, please. Okay, so as Susan said, this is just the general fund balance summary at the end of the year. And as Susan mentioned, the restricted amount of the fund balance, it really, in those amounts, it was the tax certiorari reserve, basically all the reserves I just spoke about, because all of those are restricted for a purpose. They're not free and clear. They're to address a liability or potential liability the school district has. So they're restricted for a particular purpose. Then we have our assigned fund balance. That assigned fund balance is monies, both the 1.6 million as well as 500,000 that we use out of the ERS reserve as part of our planning last year to offset this year's budget. So, just to kind of give you, and then the unassigned, of course, is the 1.9 million. That unassigned fund balance is under law is allowed to be 4% of the subsequent year's budget. Mm-hmm. Currently, we're about like 3.86, so we're not even at the 4%. We're a little bit less than 4%. But just to give you a sense of, today we have we did at 6:30 have 9.4 million. We're using 2 million of that right this year. Mm-hmm. And if we're unable to replenish that as we go through this operational budget, at the end of next year, we'll be already down to 7 million. And that, so even though 9 million, you can see how quickly, we're already using 2 million of it, and how important it is, and how important it was at the end of last year when we did have some, savings related to COVID, to put money away because it does, it can be used, fairly quickly. Next slide, please, Melissa. So this is kind of just now moving forward and thinking about, as Susan mentioned, like our audit, our fiscal year ends 6/30. So right now we're in our 4th month of our new fiscal year. We're already almost done with the first quarter of the new fiscal year. So, now we're kind of looking forward at our financials as we stand today and thinking about what our financial statements will look at 6/30 of 2021, and also thinking about, planning for our upcoming budget. So, just looking at what has kind of changed, and we've spoken about this at other meetings. So for this current operational budget, we've already now, and I've reported out, we're already reporting COVID-related expenses that are tracking at over $1 million. Again, so last year we were seeing savings, now we're kind of seeing on the opposite end how quickly, although, thankfully we did allocate funds in last year's budget for the COVID-related expenses, we've, unfortunately, much of what we're experiencing, including some of the leave clauses that were put in place after our budget was already established, were not things we could have planned for. And, and how quickly, although we had this, you look on one hand, wow, we had this, and how quickly it can go to the other. We had 700,000 savings, now we're $1 million in the other direction in a period of 6 months. So just kind of, thinking about, that it was good where we ended our last fiscal year, because this fiscal year is starting out a little bit differently. Again, we are still anticipating a growing enrollment over the next few years, because although, yes, we know that maybe some people either held their children out or decided, it may look a little different, but I think, we are still, our sections are still pretty much on point where we thought they were. Again, the enrollment projections we have, which are based upon live births as well as home sales and things such as that, are still suggesting that we're still in a place of where we're seeing increased enrollment over the next few years. And again, as we're thinking about, our financial statements and our budgets moving forward, we did, thankfully, again, we did reduce our revenues when we planned for the 2021 budget. I think, there was a lot of discussion about the unknown of this year, and that's one piece. And at least for this year, I think we did the right thing when we planned our budget. We made the revenue reductions, and I think it's pretty clear that at least in many of those categories, we're not going to see, the revenues as such as sales tax and different things I mentioned, and we did make appropriate reductions. So, I think if you were to kind of look at, oh, well, we made so much last year, but thinking about, that was a different moment in time, and how quickly, those dollars have changed. The district is still waiting on any type of federal relief that's going to be given for states and for schools, and whether, if that doesn't happen, that, what impact that'll have on our state aid. But again, as I just mentioned earlier, the one thing that we at least did do is we did plan for that 20% reduction in state aid. So, if there is any monies that does come through in relief, that'll be a positive for us, as I think we properly planned for those reductions. Again, thinking about the fund balance we just shared, and mentioning how, why you establish it. And I think as we know, we're going to be needing to use a good bit of that to really, for balancing our 21-22 budget. In particular, using money out of the reserves for both the retirement system payments, and that will really, we'll be relying more heavily on that in the not only next year's budget, but I would imagine the year after. I just wanted to note this, although it's kind of a side note, but I just thought, as we're talking about finances, just to note this, the STAR revenues, that people, I know sometimes that it's more related to people's bills, but just as a part of it is part of our budget, and where even in our accounting, where the district used to receive a higher amount of STAR revenues because the way the program worked. And what we're experiencing now is not only are people either paying those and having to wait to get the refund on the New York State taxpayers if they're eligible, we're also seeing a reduction in the amount of STAR reimbursement that's given to homeowners. And just, I think it's important just to mention it here, and we should probably just talk about it, also remind people during our budget discussions that as that STAR revenue or reimbursement commitment from the state diminishes, people's taxes just by default go up because it's not something we have control over. That's just as that there was a time in which people, here were getting a significant amount of reimbursement, and we've seen that amount decrease, even just the amount people receive back, whether through a credit on their bill or rather through a reimbursement, it's a reduction. So, it's just something I think we need to make people aware of, because sometimes I think people may see that and think it's related to something either we're doing with our budget, and it is tied to their taxes, but it isn't something we have control over. And again, just to, these are just things that have impacts as we think and move forward. Homes, as many people know, the homes were reassessed in the town, and we are now starting to see people I think this is the first year the full reassessment was rolled into people's tax bills, and people are seeing that in their current bills. And but we do, and not only the private homeowners, but as well as the non-homestead, which is more like the businesses or co-op buildings. And because of that, we do anticipate an increase in challenges to assessments. And that's really tied to the money we put into the tax certiorari reserve. Because of people now getting their full increase in assessment, we've actually been experiencing, we've been getting them almost every day. Melissa brings them down to me, the claims against the district in terms of the assessment challenges. So I think now seeing that, I was happy that we were also able to ensure that we put money away into that tax certiorari fund, and seeing that we are starting to see an increase in claims on those as well. So I believe that is the last slide of my presentation. I didn't know if anyone wanted to have any questions about what I presented or what Susan presented tonight.
Thank you, Maureen and Susan. I think, hearing both the process from you, Susan, and then seeing the detail breakout by you, Maureen, really helps illustrate where the financial picture ended at the end of the year in June. Are there any thoughts or questions from board members about this information?
I just want to thank Maureen for putting everything together, and the auditors had very good things to say about how the district is managed, and that is all Maureen. So thank you for all the work you do. I also want to underscore what you said about some of those COVID savings not being yearly savings. We will likely see a jump in expenses over the next year because we're going to get back to what the baseline was. Mm-hmm. And I think we just need to continue to remind people that, because next year there will be increases that aren't really increases, just like there are decreases this year that weren't really decreases. So maybe at some point when we are a year down the road, we can sort of net out what we think the actual increase was versus the COVID-related increase. But that's an important piece to just remember as we move forward. People often have short memories around numbers like that.
I agree. And I think that's where if you look at one financial over another without understanding all the details that may have driven things, there's so many pieces that, and like we saw the COVID impact on last year's financials, and now we're actually experiencing the opposite side of the COVID impact on this year's financials. We're actually experiencing the expenditure side of those. So I think that's a great point, Jeremy. And I think it's important as we, like to your point, kind of doing a comparison. So it's clear, because it would be skewed if you looked at last year's financials and try to compare them to this year, because there's so, the way those impacts were different.
And I think during our finance committee, we said that Dr. Piedmont said that perhaps we do some ratio studies to see the isolation of what was actually COVID expenditures and non-COVID expenditures and the effect.
Right.
For the, yes.
Right. So yeah, we were talking about how important it is. Certainly, like Susan was mentioning, we did speak about that during finance about, really making sure that we're capturing those expenditures and making sure people really understand those, because it is going to be incredibly important as we just move forward and just seeing the impacts. And we've been trying to really carefully isolate those expenditures, because it is important to be able, in order to be able to make a good comparison, Jeremy, to your point, we need to really understand like that, so we can kind of get back to that baseline, to your point, because that's the only way you can really compare your financials.
As well as the one-shot revenues that come in for the COVID as well, which we're hoping that will come.
Yeah, and she was, and Susan was just saying, we also, if there are any one-shot revenues related to COVID, I'm like, yeah, we can hope. And then we'll also want to make sure we isolate that as well, because again, just when you're looking at trying to, it is important, because there's so many moving parts, and you can understand how someone can look and say, well, why did you do this or that, without being reminded of that. So we'll make sure we're, really, I think it's extremely important this year, entering the budget season, to remind people of that.
Thank you, Maureen. And we'll also continue the Budget 101 series.
Yes.
So we can incorporate some of that, description and analysis there as well.
Yeah, I actually think, Valerie, like, I mean, I know I say this every year, like, it's as important, it's more important this year, but it is actually, like, it's always important, the budget 101, but especially in these type of times, it's even much, we typically see a higher engagement in that. Also, it's great that people are interested at other times, but certainly, it'll be important to start that process early and make sure we're going over that. It's going to be extremely much more. It's such an unusual year. I mean, it's probably one of the most unusual times, right? Financially.
It is. And thank you, Maureen, for everything that you do to make sure that these reports come out as, exemplary as they do. It is a testament to your oversight, your scrutiny, and your expertise. So thank you.
Thank you. So I guess are we good, Susan? Should I let Susan go, or is there any other?
Yes, are there any additional thoughts or questions for Susan? Well,
Great audit year.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone on your team that worked with you, Susan.
Thank you. The school district, the board, and this is a very close-knit community. So it's everyone working together, inclusive of the students and the parents, right? It's everyone working together, and it shows. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Bye-bye.
All right, we can move on to the business items, and included in there there are a number of pieces on number 10, which include the documents that Susan just gave an overview for. Are there any questions or comments from the board regarding business items 1 through 15? Is there a motion to approve business items 1 through 15?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? We can move on to the placement or services for CSE and CPSE. Are there any questions regarding these placements? Is there a motion to approve the placements for CSE and CPSE?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor? All right, we can move on to the personnel items. There are 11 appointments. Are there any questions or comments regarding the 11 appointments, personnel A? Is there a motion to approve the appointments 1 through 11?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? There are a number of amendments. 1 through 13. Are there any questions or thoughts about these amendments? A motion to approve the amendments 1 through 13?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? There are also a number of leaves of absence, 1 through 6. Are there any questions or comments about the leaves of absence? Is there a motion to approve the leaves of absence 1 through 6?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? And there's one resignation listed. Are there any questions or comments regarding this resignation? Is there a motion to approve the one item of resignation?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? All right, we'll move on to the minutes. Are there any questions or comments regarding the minutes from the September 30th, 2020 Board of Education meeting? Is there a motion to approve the minutes from September 20th, 2020?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? Under committee reports, it mentions audit. Was there any further information that the audit committee wanted to present?
I can speak as a member. I don't think so. I think we covered it pretty well. So.
Thank you. We'll move on to the second public comment. As mentioned previously, if at the meeting you could please use the raise your hand feature on the sidebar. Melissa De La Barrera will make you able to participate in the meeting. We ask that you state your name and if you're a resident of Hastings, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. I believe Ms. Lesser was waiting previously, so I don't know if you could let her in first, Melissa. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Am I on now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. This is a letter that we've sent into the Rivertown's Enterprise for this Friday's paper, and I'll just read it to you. The Hastings School Board should be commended for continuing to move forward with the capital investment in Hillside in the face of unwarranted and inaccurate criticism. We've underinvested in Hillside for decades. The current plan represents necessary improvements to provide a learning environment and facilities that are standard for many Westchester school districts, and that Hastings has been needing for a long time. It's not surprising that capital improvements are uncovering unforeseen challenges when we have invested so little for so long. That's why we have contingencies. It's not the reason to stop the investment. Critics are implying that the need for these improvements will change due to COVID-19. We'd like to point out that by the time these improvements are completed, COVID-19 is highly likely to be a controlled virus with both And even today, based on last month's CDC data, small children face similar or less risk from COVID-19 than from the flu. For those who argue against large gatherings in schools, we ask if that means they never intend to go to a basketball game, a concert, or Broadway, because the risks are orders of magnitude greater to the adults in those settings. Finally, some have argued that delay is more fiscally responsible. This couldn't be further from the truth. The state is expected to subsidize much of this investment, but going forward, state budgets are going to be extremely pressured, and there's no guarantee that the co-investment will be available if we delay. The odds are that delay will cost us more, potentially much more, than moving forward. Change is hard everywhere, but we have a way in Hastings of making it even harder on ourselves. Voices of negativity and conservatism often seem to swamp a positive, future-oriented community. And even after votes are decisive and actions approved, there are some who desire to undermine and re-legislate. Fortunately, our school board seems to be listening to the entire community, not just the negative voices, and putting the interests of our children first. Hastings-on-Hudson is an amazing village. Let's move forward to give our children schools that match it. Thank you. And it's Gabrielle and Rich Lesser, 36 Calumet Avenue, Hastings-on-Hudson.
Thank you.
I would just like to thank Gab and point out for some of you who might not know that Gab is a former president of the Board of Ed and served for many years on the board.
Okay, and we have one additional, it says a Zoom user that has raised their hand. I don't, please state your name.
They look like they're still muted, Zoom user.
Yeah, they would have to unmute themselves. Like I've made it so that they could speak.
It appears, thank you, Melissa. It appears we've given them 2 opportunities. I don't know if you've listed yourself as Zoom user, you've raised your hand maybe inadvertently. It doesn't appear that there are any further public comments. Are there any Board of Education comments this evening?
Awfully early to end a meeting.
I'll ruin that, Jody. I would like to give maybe personal updates, but 2 updates. We do have a nice quick board meeting here. I think 2 things that the community should be keeping an eye out in the near future. We're coming up, we have to make a decision moving forward if we're going to make any changes to Hillside in particular. I think our students continue to fall much farther behind 2 of our school districts, Chappaqua and Bronxville. They've had now 30 days of full instruction. And I think it's something we have to really look at, why we drew the line at kindergarten and couldn't extend it to 1st grade even, or 2nd grade. And something else that I think a lot of people in the community are aware of, our after-school programs are continuing to operate, and they are not quite as popular as usual. And the board is definitely aware of that and looking to make an adjustment by the end of October to make sure that our 2 popular Hillside after-school programs remain viable for this year and future years. Thank you, guys.
If you are dying for one more person to speak, I could quickly update everyone on this student and board liaison meeting from October 13th. Both Dr. Henning Piedmont and Ms. Mansky were there, and the 2 teachers who facilitate or are advisors to the student union. The kids first mentioned Flex Wednesday, so they were adding to the information that Ms. Mansky is collecting about what feels good about Flex Wednesday and what could be improved. They wanted to talk about ideas for upping school spirit, given that that has been an up and down experience. They're considering things like green and gold day competitions, where you would get points for the number of articles of clothing in those colors. A raffle of Hastings merchandise, or merch as I'm supposed to say. A socially distanced Olympics, and looking into what sports could be done that way, maybe badminton or online games like Risk, which was an interesting idea. Fundraising for school scholarships, and they may go to local businesses. I guess in the past, sometimes teachers sign up for slots to appear at those restaurants, and students come to support the businesses on their less busy days, and also to see the teachers, and that businesses give 10% of the proceeds from that day. So that's a nice idea. And anything else to add? Did I leave anything out, Valerie or Melissa?
Oops, no, you didn't. The only thing that changed with the group was that the group is smaller, so that maybe it's 5 or 6 students rather than the entire student union that we met with. And I personally thought that that was a really good way to hear students, more, so when you're in a larger group, it's, it's sometimes a little more difficult to hear from all students, but it was really good to hear them, represent these issues, and that we know they're representing them not just from their own perspective. Their experiences matter, but they are talking to their peer groups. So it was really incredible, feedback, and, feedback that we could hear. And so I really appreciate that structure. And I want to thank Mr. Scotch and Mr. McCann, who are the advisors, and Lady Pietro for, making that possible. And all the ways in which they're trying to build community spirit, being, while half of them are at home learning, the other half are in school. So they're making a valiant effort. So I want to applaud them for all of their, all of their creative, projects that will advance that cause.
Yeah, it's always a lot of fun to hear from them.
Are there any other thoughts from the board this evening? I just want to close by saying I've really appreciated getting the phone messages about healthy habits in Hastings. I think we can all use the reminders and to remind the children in our lives to continue to practice social distancing, to continue to wear masks, to continue to wash hands frequently, so that we have greater chances of remaining healthier as a community. So I think, those positive messages were a surprise, and I think welcome. And the more we can individually keep up on good habits and encourage those around us to do so, I think the better for everyone in the school district. I also want to thank all the staff and administrators for pivoting so abruptly these past couple weeks, and for continuing to serve our children. I think that all the teachers and all of the administrators turned very quickly on a dime, and I think it's noticed and appreciated. And as the student representative Sabine said earlier, she noticed, and her peers notice how hard all the adults are working around them. So thank you for that. Is there a motion to close the Board of Education meeting?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks, everybody.